Good afternoon. I am Jamie Evans, and I am talking to you about death and my comfort, how comfortable I am with death, and speaking about death, and my own death. At this point in my life, I am not very comfortable speaking about my own death. I have quite a few reservations because I have children that are still very young. Um, and I want to see them grow up. I want to see what it's like to be a grandmother. I do have a daughter who is expecting right now and expecting my first granddaughter, so I am happy about that. And it bothers me to think that I'm not going to be here to see her grow up or to watch my children mature um, and accomplish their goals and their dreams that I have for them or that we have shared with each other that they have for themselves. At this point in my life, when it's when we're talking about my death, I'm not at the point where I'm a Christian, so I know that I do believe that once I die, I am going to heaven, and I believe that. But I don't want to think about how I'm going to die or when I'm going to die or what's going to happen when I'm not here anymore. I think it saddens me to feel like that it's going to be a point where my children are here without me. Um, I do a lot for my grandfather right now. So I kind of worry about if something was to happen to me, then who's going to make sure he gets his meals every week, or who's going to call him just check and see if he needs coffee or things like that. Um, I am, however, very comfortable speaking about death as a whole. Maybe it's because of my profession or just my experiences with death. I have had quite a few in the last couple of years. I actually lost my best friend to sickle cell. Um, I lost my grandmother to a stroke, and I have lost quite a few clients in my profession. So, talking about death is not just this big no no to me. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, about talking about everyone else's death, it'll be a 10. I'm quite comfortable with it. But talking about my own death is probably a 3 or 4 because that's just not something I'm ready to discuss or deal with. Um, I think one of my weakest areas when it comes to dealing with death is simply the not knowing. Um, and going on. As I said, I lost my grandmother uh, a year ago in December, and it's still very hard going on, and she's not here, or things that I was used to doing with her that I'm not able to do anymore simply because she's not here. Um, and I often find myself trying to do things to make me remember her or how she would have done things. So, um, I guess one of the biggest issues that I have dealing with death is the unknown. Not knowing what it's gonna be like anymore without that person, or just knowing you can never pick up the phone and talk to that person again or see that person. That's kind of hard for me. Um, and I grew up with my grandfather and my aunt, so death in my household was pretty. It wasn't really talked about until it happened. I can remember as a child, my grandfather is very straightforward. He has been ever since I can remember. And I can remember when my great grandmother sisters died, and I can remember everyone saying, well, call granddaddy, let granddaddy tell her. And I can remember him coming to tell my great grandmother that her sister had died, and I can remember being a child sitting on the living room floor and him coming in the room, and he said, Ursula, have you talked to your sister today? And my great grandmother said, no, I hadn't talked to her. He said, okay, well, you probably need to put on some clothes and go up the street because she's dead. And it was just, that was it. It wasn't very emotional. It wasn't a lot of tears. It was just like, it is what it is. Um, I think in my household growing up, we not that we weren't able to use our emotions, but as I said, my grandfather was a very strong male. So it was, I guess, looked upon as weak at a certain for a certain extent, from a certain point, from a certain standpoint. Um, so we just didn't do it. It was when I lost my best friend. I can remember not crying for a while. Then I can remember saying, well, everything's gonna be okay. She's gonna be all right, and she's in a better place, and all of this stuff. Because I felt like that's what I needed to say at the time, and it was months down the. Well, yeah, about 4 months, because she passed in July and September. I think my grieving process kicked in because it was a point of the year where we did a lot together with our children and just as best friends. So it began to get really hard for me. And I cried a lot because I really missed her. And for the longest, I just felt like I couldn't cry, or was I really supposed to be crying? And even now, as an adult, I feel like, well, you're not supposed to cry in front of everybody. You watch who you cry in front of, because that's just how we were taught. And you're taught to not to bereave, not to grieve to a certain extent. Like once an individual is buried, then we're supposed to move on. And I don't think people really understand that life doesn't really happen like that. That just because you bury somebody, it doesn't mean that you're going to forget about them automatically and move on with your life. That things get hard and you have to get used to not having that person there. um I don't know. I think people get confused feeling like there's a specific time for you to grieve or a specific time for you to hurt. And I don't agree with that. I think that sometimes people, like in my case, when my grandmother passed away, I felt like I couldn't grieve right then. I can remember my cousin and I, well, it's actually 5 grandchildren, and we're the only girls. And I can remember us at the hospital, and she's only a year or two older than me, but it's my dad, and my dad has 2 children, and her mom has 2 children. Well, there's 6 of us, and my uncle has 2 twin boys. And I can remember Kim and I standing together saying, we just not gonna cry in front of my aunt and my dad. And she was saying, my mom and your dad. We were gonna be strong for them. And I think neither one of us cried during the entire time we were at the hospital. And I can remember when my grandmother, when her brain began to swell, and they told us that her vital signs were changing. Her blood pressure had dropped. My cousin and I walked out to go get a cup of coffee, and we got in the elevator, and it was just like time the elevator door stopped shut. Both of us started to cry, and it was just like, to me, like this amazing release, because we were trying to be so strong for our parents and everybody who was there. We just didn't want to cry in front of them, trying to keep everybody else strong, and we didn't realize how much we were doing to ourselves. And I think we cried then, and we didn't cry together anymore. But at the funeral, neither one of us cried. I can remember her making herself so busy, and she said as well that I was making myself so busy. But I think it was a defense mechanism so we wouldn't cry, there. So a year down the line, I don't feel as if I have yet to properly grieve my grandmother's death. I know I have not properly grieved my grandmother's death, because I'm getting teary eyed now. But I still currently have a message on my phone that she called and left me, and I emailed it to myself so I could have access to it. And I still listen to it because I miss her so much sometimes. So I don't think that there's no specific time limit for the grieving process, and I think that it's totally misunderstood because, especially in the African American community, we view tears as a sign of weakness or as a sign of something that you shouldn't do. So with that, we have kind of disregarded the grieving process, and that is all.